السلام عليكم. اليوم عندنا موضوع المسل ماستيكيشن بالجنرال اناتومي. المسل ماستيكيشن يتكون من 4 عضلات اللي هن الماسيتر والتمبرالز والميديال بيتروجايد والليترال بيتروجايد اللي تكون responsible عن الماستيكيشن اللي هو chewing، وبالإضافة إلى حركة الجو اللي هنا كما موضح بالرسم التمبرالز والليترال بيتروجايد والماسيتر والميديال بيتروجايد. نجي على أول عضلة اللي هي الماسيتر. تكون thick quadrilateral muscle consisting of two portions, is superficial with deep. The superficial portion is larger or raised by the thick tendons aponesis from the zygomatic process of maxilla and from the anterior 2/3 of the lower border of the zygomatic arch. فالfibers تكون pass downward and backward. Inserted to the angle of the lower half of the lateral surface of the ramus of the mandible. The deep portion is much smaller، يعني يكون أصغر ويكون أكثر عضلية من حيث الملمس. It arises from the posterior third of the lower border and from the whole of the medial surface of the zygomatic arch. The fibers مالتها pass downward and forward. Deep portion of the muscle is partly concealed in front by the superficial portion. Behind it's covered by parotid gland. The fibers of the two portions are continuous at their insertion. كما ملاحظ بالرسم هنا deep part وهنا superficial part. هسه نجي على attachment of the masseter. يكون organ و insertion. الorgan proximal attachment zygomatic arch medial surface and inferior border. الانسيرشن نقول distal attachment اللي هو distal attachment lateral surface of angle and the ramus of mandible. The action of masseter muscle on the mandible elevates and protracts mandible to close jaw. The nerve of masseter اللي هو mandible branch of trigeminal nerve V اللي هو V3. نلاحظ بالرسم هي هاي الأجزاء الموجودة الانر masseter muscle. نجي هسه على temporals. One of the main muscles of mastication which involve the elevation and retraction of the lower jaw. الtemporal muscle تكون wide متسعة و van shaped muscle on each side of the head that covers most of the temporal bone and fills the temporal fossa اللي هي يعني تكون تم temporal fossa. الtemporals يكون مغطى covered by the temporal fascia. الاتاتشمنت مالتها origin و insertion. الorigin proximal attachment temporal lines temporal fossa and temporal fascia. الinsertion distal attachment tip and medial surface of coronoid process of mandible. الأكشن bar of temporalis اللي يكون elevates and retracts mandible at temporomandibular joint to close the jaw. النيرف مال temporalis اللي هو mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve V3. هاي كمان لاحظ هاي temporals موقعها وهاي coronoid process وهاي temporal fossa. نيجي على medial pterygoid. Medial pterygoid muscle one of the mascatory muscles. The medial pterygoid located يعني موقعه infratemporal fossa and it involves several movements of the mandible. The attachment of medial pterygoid muscle همين origin or insertion. Origin proximal attachment superficial head tuberosity of maxilla with deep head يكون medial surface of lateral pterygoid palate and palatine bone. The insertion distal attachment medial surface of ramus and angle of the mandible. نجي على action of medial pterygoid elevate mandible and protract mandible and move the mandible side to side. يحرك الماندبل. النيرف مال medial pterygoid اللي يكون mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve اللي هو V3. هاي نلاحظ الجزء الديب والsuperficial head of the medial pterygoid وهاي حركة mandible side to side. نيجي على lateral pterygoid. lateral pterygoid تكون short و thick muscle تكون تمتد extends almost horizontal and posteriorly and lateral between the infratemporal fossa and the condyle of the mandible. It arises two heads اللي هو superior and inferior يعني الأبر والlower. Superior part arises from the lower part of the lateral surface of the greater wing of the sphenoid bone, and from the infratemporal crest it inserts يعني تدرج in the TMG capsule and TMG disc. The inferior part هذا الانفيريور عكس superior arise from the lateral surface of the lateral pterygoid palate and inserts in the depression in the front of the neck. هسه الاتاتشمنت مال lateral pterygoid muscle اللي organ و insertion organ proximal attachment superior head great wing of the sphenoid bone والinferior head lateral surface of the lateral pterygoid palate. The insertion distal attachment condyle of mandible and temporomandibular joint. The action of the lateral pterygoid muscle on the mandible contract mandible ثلاث وظائف protract mandible depress mandible and individually they move the mandible side to side. النيرف مال lateral pterygoid muscle and spinal segment mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve P3. مثل ما نلاحظ هاي superior and inferior heads of the lateral pterygoid والmedial pterygoid وهذا الماندبل. وشكرا لكم.